There is a single idea that explains John D. Rockefeller's entire fortune, and it is not the idea that most people repeat. It is not that he worked hard. It is not that he was thrifty. It is not even that he was unusually intelligent. By his own admission, and by the testimony of the men who worked beside him for 40 years, he was bright, but not brilliant. The idea is older than him, simpler than him, and more useful to you than any biography of him will ever be. It is this: in every system that moves a thing from where it is to where it is wanted, there is exactly one point at which the system narrows. Find that point, own it, charge rent on it. Everyone else in the system will arrange themselves around your terms because they have no other way to get the thing through. Rockefeller did not invent oil. He did not drill the wells. He did not own the lamps that burned the kerosene. He owned, with quiet and deliberate violence, the place where the oil had to pass between the well and the lamp. He owned the bottleneck. And in owning it, he became the first man in history whose wealth had to be measured against the gross domestic product of his own country, because no smaller unit would hold him. This is not a story about luck. It is not a story about being early. Plenty of men were earlier into oil than Rockefeller was. By the time he built his first refinery in 1863, the Pennsylvania oil region had been booming for 4 years. The drillers had already made fortunes and lost them. The refiners had already entered and folded. The market had already convulsed twice. He was not first. He was not even particularly fast. He was, instead, looking at a map that none of his competitors were looking at. They were looking at the wells, where the oil came out of the ground. He was looking at the railroads, where the oil had to ride to reach any customer. That is the entire story. Everything that followed is footnote. To see how powerful this idea is, look at the present. In 2023, a Dutch company called ASML reported revenue of just under 28 billion euros. ASML does not make smartphones. It does not make laptops. It does not make microchips. It does not even make most of the equipment that makes microchips. What ASML does is build one machine, the extreme ultraviolet lithography system, that is the only machine on Earth capable of etching the patterns needed for the most advanced semiconductors. Every iPhone made after 2020, every advanced graphics card used to train artificial intelligence, every cutting-edge military radar in the Western Alliance, all of them trace back, in the end, to a machine that comes out of one factory in Veldhoven, the Netherlands, and out of nowhere else on the planet. The chip companies, TSMC, Samsung, Intel, are larger than ASML. The customers of those chip companies, Apple, Nvidia, Microsoft, are larger still, by orders of magnitude. But the chip companies cannot build advanced chips without ASML's machines, and ASML cannot be replicated because replicating it would require recreating 30 years of accumulated engineering and a supply chain of 5,000 specialized vendors. ASML is the bottleneck. ASML names its price. ASML decides, in consultation with the Dutch and American governments, which countries may even buy the machines at all. This is not new. This is the oldest pattern in commercial history, dressed in white-coated engineers and clean rooms. The Venetian glassmakers held it for 2 centuries. The British East India Company held it for 1. De Beers held it for the diamond trade through most of the 20th century. The Suez Canal Authority holds it today for 1 out of every 10 container ships afloat. In each case, the same structure repeats. A flow of valuable matter moves from where it is made to where it is needed. Somewhere along the route, The flow narrows. The party that owns the narrows owns the system. Rockefeller saw the narrows in 1865 when he was 26 years old in a country whose oil industry was less than a decade old. He spent the next 45 years methodically, patiently, and without apology, making sure no one else ever owned them. Target 2673, Module 1, Historical Narration, Voice, Observer. In the 1860s, oil came out of the ground in northwestern Pennsylvania. It had to be moved in wooden barrels on horse-drawn wagons over dirt roads to small refineries that boiled it into kerosene and lubricating oil. The refined product then had to travel again, by river, by canal, and increasingly by rail, to the cities of the East and the markets of Europe. There were many drillers. There were many refiners. There were many buyers. But there were only 3 railroad systems that connected the Pennsylvania fields to the Atlantic ports. The New York Central, controlled by Commodore Vanderbilt. The Erie, controlled by Jay Gould. The Pennsylvania, controlled by Tom Scott. 3 rail trunks, 3 men. The entire American oil industry rode on their iron. Rockefeller did not own a single mile of track. He understood, as few of his contemporaries did, that he did not need to. What he needed was to make himself indispensable to the 3 men who did. A railroad is a fixed-cost business. Its iron is laid, its locomotives are bought, its engineers are paid, whether the trains run full or empty. The railroad's enemy is not its competitor. The railroad's enemy is the empty boxcar. The man who can guarantee to fill those boxcars every day with predictable tonnage on a predictable schedule owns leverage that no shipper of smaller volume can match. By 1868, Rockefeller's Cleveland refineries were shipping more oil than any other single shipper in the country. He went to Vanderbilt, he went to Gould, he went to Scott. He told each of them, separately, that he could guarantee 60 carloads of oil a day, every week, every month, if they would give him a rate lower than they gave anyone else. They did. He did not stop there. He demanded and received a rebate, a kickback, on the rates paid by every other refiner who shipped on the same line. The railroads paid him for the privilege of carrying his competitors' oil. By 1872, this arrangement had been formalized into a private agreement called the South Improvement Company. It was discovered, denounced, and dissolved within 3 months. But the dissolution did not matter. By the time it became public, Rockefeller had already used it to crush 22 of the 26 refineries in Cleveland in 6 weeks. The bottleneck had done its work. So let us extract the principle from the history. A bottleneck has 4 properties. If a position you are considering occupying does not have all 4, it is not actually a bottleneck. It is a hard job that pays a salary. First property. The flow through the position is large and growing. Oil shipments out of Pennsylvania doubled every 2 years in the 1860s. ASML's lithography market doubles roughly every 6. The Suez Canal carries more tonnage every year than the year before. A bottleneck on a stagnant flow is worth very little. A bottleneck on a compounding flow is worth more each year you hold it. Second property. The position is structurally hard to duplicate. Not legally hard, not socially hard, structurally hard. Anyone with capital can build a refinery. No one without 40 years of partnerships, accumulated tacit knowledge, and a captured supplier network can build a standard oil distribution system. No one without 30 years of optical engineering can build an ASML machine. The barrier is not a moat dug by lawyers. The barrier is a moat dug by time. Third property. The owner of the position can extract rent without being seen extracting it. Rockefeller's rebates were paid privately. ASML's pricing is opaque. De Beers' supply controls operated through cartel arrangements no customer ever signed. A visible monopoly attracts regulation. An invisible bottleneck attracts revenue. The skill of the operator is not in achieving the position. It is in occupying it so quietly that the system around it does not realize the position is occupied at all. Fourth property. The flow has no realistic substitute. Lamp oil in 1870 had no substitute. Electricity was 40 years away. Advanced semiconductors today have no substitute. A general waiting for a different chip is a general fighting the last war. When there is a substitute, there is no bottleneck. There is merely a vendor who happens, for the moment, to be ahead. When all four properties are present, the position pays compound returns to whoever holds it. When even one is missing, the position is a job. The most expensive error in business is to mistake the second category for the first. There is a letter in the Rockefeller archive dated December of 1880, written by Rockefeller to his closest partner, Henry Flagler. It is not a famous letter. It does not contain any of the quotations that are usually attributed to him. It contains instead a single sentence that explains the architecture of his fortune more clearly than any biographer has ever managed. He writes, and I am quoting now, with the gloved precision of a man holding a document that has outlived everyone who knew the writer. He writes, "We must not allow the position to depend upon any one road, any one line, any one port, or any one customer. We must be the necessary party to all of them." Read it twice. The sentence is not about scale. It is not about market share. It is not about price. It is about position. The necessary party. The party without whom nothing in the system can happen. The party that every other party must address before they can address each other. He is 41 years old when he writes this. He is already richer than any man in the United States. He has another 47 years to live. He will spend roughly the first 25 of them executing this sentence with a thoroughness that has no precedent. He will buy or build pipelines so that he does not depend upon any one road. He will lease tankers so that he does not depend upon any one line. He will acquire terminals in New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Boston, Antwerp, Bremen, and Yokohama, so that he does not depend upon any one port. He will sell directly to retailers and, eventually, directly to households, so that he does not depend upon any one customer. Every step is in the books. Every step has a date. Every step is, in his own term, a move toward becoming the necessary party. Notice what is absent from the sentence. There is no language of victory in it. There is no language of competition in it. There is no language of customers or markets or growth. The vocabulary is engineering vocabulary. Roads, lines, ports, customers. These are infrastructure objects to him, the way a civil engineer might speak of bearings, joints, and load paths. He is not running a business in this letter. He is reading a system. The men who lost to him in the 1880s and 1890s did not understand this. They believed they were in the oil business. They believed they were competing for customers, for crude, for capital. They were, in fact, competing for none of those things. They were competing, although it would have astonished them to be told so, for adjacencies. For the wagon route from the well to the rail siding, for the loading platform at the port, for the relationship with the buyer in Hamburg. Rockefeller picked these up, one by one, year by year, often for prices that looked small at the time of purchase and immense in retrospect. That phrase, the necessary party,
is, in the end, the only definition of a bottleneck that matters. Everything else is decoration. By 1904, the year Ida Tarbell's expose concluded its serial publication in McClure's magazine, Standard Oil controlled the following percentages of the American petroleum supply chain. Crude oil purchasing from the wellhead, 87%. Refining capacity, 91%. Pipeline mileage from the fields to the refineries, 89%. Wholesale distribution to retailers, 90%. Export terminal capacity at the Atlantic ports, 84%.
Tanker tonnage moving American kerosene to European markets, 78%. Read those numbers slowly. They do not describe a company that competes in an industry. They describe a company that has become an industry. A driller in 1904 who wanted to sell oil in the United States had, in practical terms, exactly one buyer. A refiner who wanted crude had exactly one source. A retailer who wanted kerosene had exactly one wholesaler. A European wholesaler who wanted American product had exactly one shipper. When you control a single bottleneck, you charge rent. When you control every bottleneck simultaneously, the very concept of rent dissolves, because there is no longer a separate party paying you. There is only you charging yourself in different costumes at different points along the line. The system, from end to end, has become a single corporate consciousness moving petroleum through itself the way a body moves blood. The number that ought to land with the most weight in this list is not any of the ones I have just read. It is the one I cannot read, because the company never published it. The number is the rate of return on capital that Standard Oil earned in those years, on the integrated, end-to-end, bottleneck-saturated system it had built. By the most conservative accounting any historian has been able to reconstruct from the surviving books, it was, year after year for 30 years, somewhere between 25 and 40%. There is no equity market in human history that has paid that return for that long. To put those returns in their proper frame, a diversified portfolio of American stocks held continuously from 1870 to 1910 would have compounded at roughly 7% per year. A skilled investor with access to private opportunities, bank shares, real estate, industrial bonds, might have managed 12. The very best railroad fortunes of the era, those of Vanderbilt and Gould, compounded at 15 to 18% at their peaks, and could not sustain that for more than a decade. Standard Oil compounded at 25 to 40% for 3 decades without interruption, including through the panic of 1873, the depression of the 1890s, and the financial collapse of 1907. This is what owning the bottleneck means. It does not mean making more money than your competitors. It means operating in a financial regime that your competitors do not have access to. The numbers do not merely beat the market. They do not belong on the same chart as the market. Now, stop for a moment. I want you to think not about Rockefeller, but about the industry, the trade, the profession, the company you are inside of right now. Wherever you are, whatever you do, ask yourself, with the same blank patience that Rockefeller asked it in his Cleveland refinery office in 1865, the only question that matters. Where is the bottleneck? Not where is the demand, not where is the talent, not where is the capital, not where is the customer. All of those questions have answers, and all of those answers are obvious, and all of those answers are competed away within months by people who can see what you can see. Where is the narrows? Where is the point through which the value has to pass? Where is the position at which, if you stood there, every transaction in your sector would have to acknowledge you in passing? Most industries have one. Some industries have several. A few industries, the ones with abundant substitutes and low barriers, have none, which is why they pay so little, and why everyone who works in them is replaceable. The bottlenecks are not always glamorous. The bottleneck in modern logistics is not the truck. It is the dispatching software. The bottleneck in modern medicine is not the doctor. It is the insurance authorization. The bottleneck in modern publishing is not the book. It is the algorithmic recommendation. In each case, the visible center of the industry is decorative, and the actual power sits a layer up or a layer down from the people who imagine themselves to be running things. Find that layer, move to it. The rest of the industry will then arrange itself around your terms, not because you have demanded that it do so, but because the geometry of the system leaves it no other option. Consider the question concretely for a moment. If you are a software engineer, the bottleneck is rarely the code. It is the build system, the deployment pipeline, the on-call rotation, the layer of infrastructure that every feature must pass through before it reaches a user. The engineer who owns that layer owns the velocity of the entire organization. If you are a writer, the bottleneck is rarely the writing. It is the distribution, the newsletter list, the publication relationship, the channel through which the writing reaches a reader who pays attention. If you are a doctor in private practice, the bottleneck is rarely the clinical skill. It is the referral network and the billing arrangement. In each case, the visible work is a commodity, and the invisible position around the work is the asset. Rockefeller understood this in 1865 in a context where almost no one else did. He looked at the oil industry and he saw not a market, but a pipeline. The valuable part of the pipeline was not the oil at either end. The valuable part of the pipeline was the choke point in the middle, where the oil had to be forced through a finite throat before it could continue its journey. He spent his life sitting at that throat with his hand on the valve and asking each party that approached him for the price he had decided that day to charge. That was the whole game. That was always the whole game. That will always be the whole game. Because the geometry of bottlenecks is not a fact about petroleum or semiconductors or canals. It is a fact about the structure of any system in which something valuable flows from one place to another. Rockefeller saw the geometry. He was not the first to see it. He was simply the first to commit his entire life to it, without distraction, without hedging, without sentiment, and without the human weakness of wanting to be liked by the people on either side of the narrows he had chosen to own. The lithography machines come off the line in Veldhoven, in the south of the Netherlands, one every 4 weeks. They cost roughly $200 million apiece. They are loaded onto specialized trucks, then onto cargo flights, then onto secured ground transport, and delivered to fabs in Taiwan, Korea, the United States, and a small number of other approved destinations. The machines do not advertise themselves. The Dutch town they come from does not appear in tourist guides. The engineers who build them speak rarely in public. The company they work for is not, in any sense the public would recognize, glamorous. But every iPhone you have ever owned has been touched by one of those machines. Every advanced AI model trained in the last 3 years has been computed on chips that pass through one of those machines. Every drone surveilling every border that has been militarized in your lifetime has, somewhere in its electronics, a piece of silicon whose features were etched by one of those machines. The flow of intelligence through the modern economy is a river. The river narrows. The river narrows in our century, in Veldhoven. If you understand that, you understand Rockefeller. He simply saw the narrows of his own century and walked toward them and stayed. The names change. The geometry does not.